In January 2016, a United Nations study on the question of minorities was especially concerned about discrimination linked to castes throughout the world. About 250 million persons are discriminated against because of their caste. The communities that are the most affected are in South Asia, in particular in India and Nepal. However, the phenomenon also exists in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Pacific Islands, and among diaspora communities.
The discrimination based on work and descent is a very particular form of discrimination, which has not sufficiently been captured by the human rights organizations, neither by the UN, nor even by the several human rights and the states as they are discussing this issue. This is like racism, this is like indigenous, this is like minority, but very specifically different in the sense that it is discrimination by descent, by birth, and forced occupations. So people who are subjected to this are facing with segregation in some places. They cannot marry, they can only marry within their caste. They're treated as impure people. Sometimes they're treated as witches. Sometimes they're treated in all sorts of forced occupations, slavery. And anybody rises against that.
Caste systems are taken very badly by those who are subject to caste. It's also very badly taken by all supporters of human rights. I have in mind a very particular case that I know a lot about, and that is the case of Mauritania. How is that in 2019 there are human beings who also belong to other human beings, and that these human beings have no rights in relation to other humans? They are seen as second-class citizens. There are the Haratins of Mauritania, but also the Negroes of Mauritania, who are seen as foreigners in their own country. The world needs to get organized. Africa needs to get organized and needs to understand that it needs all its human resources to create an egalitarian Africa where all the sons and daughters are equal not only by the law, but also equal overall.
This form of discrimination was at the heart of a workshop recently organized in the Senegalese capital. It is the initiative of the NGO TrustAfrica, the Inclusive Project, and the Asia Dalit Rights Forum. The objective? To hold a comprehensive dialogue with the leaders of African communities on their experience on the theme World Partnership and Communal Action in the Fight Against Discrimination Based on Work and Descent, including systems of caste.
The approach is on several levels. First of all, the concerned groups need to get sensitized so that they can get organized and free themselves so that they become the prime actors of this fight. We can't free people if the latter are not present. And the moment is a very fine example of how the concerned groups has mobilized itself for its own liberation. The second aspect is that you have to intervene by taking legal action so that people get sanctioned when they practice discriminatory attitudes, and so that people can base themselves on the legal structure to demand the rights. The third aspect is that you need to act on people's way of thinking. Because as for the ideological condition, even if the material situation changes, people still live with the ideology. They'll forbid their children to marry someone from a different caste. They'll refuse to take on certain jobs. So we need to act by carrying out advocacy work in schools.
These forms of slavery are often overshadowed in a context of intergenerational slavery. Even though it includes work segregation, forced labor, and indecent jobs, the phenomenon of discrimination based on work and descent goes beyond the issue of employment in general. It includes problems such as social-cultural segregation and economic exclusion, which hinder any progress in the field of fundamental human rights. Our society is ahead if you compare it with many other societies in the sub-region, where society has been arranged by caste and has been so during the whole of the Middle Age period. At the time, this was considered as progress in the way society and the state were organized. But after a while, things seem to have crystallized, and ideological aspirations overtook material interests. And I think that today in Senegal, there has been progress. Some who have recognized their caste and have appropriated this position in society have been very successful in the field of music and economy, and even in politics, which is the one field where there has been resistance. So we can say that Senegal is definitely progressing.
If you look at the global context between South Asia, Asia, Africa, Latin America, there are many different ways in which groups of individuals have been historically excluded because of birth and descent, forced into various forms of occupation where there's little mobility or escape. And as my colleagues have suggested throughout the sessions, that the existing frameworks at the nation-state level and the multilateral systems that focus on other areas like racism, child rights, indigenous rights, religious minorities, blasphemy, are all foundational and important, of course, for us to make progress in general. But we need a new system of thinking and a new language of solidarity to bring all these different cultures together.
Abolished, criminalized, considered a crime against humanity, slavery still remains a current practice in some countries. In the 2018 Global Slavery Index, the Australian NGO Walk Free reported that more than 9 million persons in Africa are subject to a form of modern slavery.
Slavery still exists in Mauritania as a traditional practice, and the big problem is that there is a denial in which the political systems are entrusted. The slaves, or former slaves, make up the majority of the Mauritanian population, and with all that, they are marginalized and discriminated against. There are also other social groups that are discriminated against, such as the blacksmiths and the slaves in other black communities. In Mauritania, we can say that the major part of the population is discriminated against. In Chad, children and women are not treated lawfully, and there are cases of trafficking, kidnapping and slavery which happen in full daylight. And despite the international legal and sub-regional instruments related to human rights, and despite the existence of penal laws which should repress these practices, and I will tell you that in a recent past, children were sold on the market. Plastic armbands were attached on the forearm. A black bracelet indicated that this merchandise did not yet have a buyer. A white armband indicated that there was a buyer and the item had been purchased. In the 21st century, these children are forced to work in camel breeding. They take care of elderly people. As for girls, they are being abused and they are also being trafficked into neighboring countries.
This workshop enabled to define and understand the structures existing within societies which perpetuate discrimination. It also led to the creation of a platform for human rights and sustainable development according to the SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
About 50 years ago, women have been abused. There is no law. The man will say, no, she's my property. You can't interfere. Others can't interfere, state can't. But afterwards, women said, no, we are nobody's property. Now the same thing is happening with Dalits, with people of caste and others. So we will say, we are nobody's property to be enslaved. We want proper laws, first to abolish this, to give special measures for education, for employment, for education and for development, and that is the way we hope to gather ourselves. And if anybody continues to abuse us, we will have laws and we will equip. we will turn from victims to human rights defenders.
On ne peut pas se développer en marginalisant tout un pan de la société.
You cannot develop if you marginalize a whole section of society, if you deprive yourself from resources and intelligence, and if you consider whole groups as being non-humans, having no place in society. This attitude doesn't conform with what is required in order to reach true development.
Et ça, c'est pas en conformité justement avec ce qu'il faudrait pour arriver à un développement véritable.
Development is about mobilizing all energy, all the resource, intellectual resource and so forth, so that people can overcome the great challenge that is poverty and achieve procedures of transformation that conform better to what development should be.
The system of caste constitute enormous obstacles to the full exercise of civil, political, economical, social and cultural rights of the persons victim of this type of exclusion. There are inherent economical and social consequences. That is why it is necessary for governments to act in view of preserving the constitutional principles and the incumbent obligations by operation of international treaties. The governors are also called upon to act so that all citizens, independent of their caste or their descent, can fully enjoy their rights.
If we are to put an end to discrimination, it means that in building the economic base of society, we must have a division of labor that will ensure that it is merit-based, that you are who you want to be and you earn what you deserve. That is absolutely essential. We must create a new civil base, meaning the rights of people must be protected. And the institutions must be prepared to protect them so that no rights will be violated. Or if violated, there will be right to redress. We must be able to create a new political structure which makes each individual sovereign. Like they are talking about minority, but in reality, if you have a republic, there is no longer any minority, because the republic is about the sovereign citizen. Republics are about citizens. And since they are about citizens and you have one vote, the other person has one vote, you are equal in sovereignty.
The declaration produced as an outcome of this three-day meeting will serve as an instrument for the fight against this type of discrimination. A document will be presented to the United Nations as a tool to help put in place laws which will enable to abolish this form of human disrespect.